Hi, welcome. This is Angela Coulter, your Consciousness Transformation Ascension Guide and originator of Trinity Energy Progression, bringing you this week's Living the Shift. And today we're going to talk about spiritual tools. And when I talk about tools, I talk about anything we use outside of who we are. So outside of ourselves, right? So that can be any rituals that we do, any ceremonies. It can include things like even, you know what, having to listen to music to meditate, or like sound healing is a big thing right now. Crystals, you can use tarot cards, you can use runes. There's so many different things, but there's also different practices. Have you learned energy healing practices? Have you learned intuition development practices? And what I want to talk about today is really important, and it keeps on coming up recently. It's funny, I could swear I spoke about this before, but went back and looked over my list of episodes, and I was like, well, I don't see it in here. So apparently I haven't. It feels like I've spoken about it every place else. And this is really, really important because when we learn how to do those things, right? So when we learn how to access our divine abilities, is what I call them. I don't call them supernatural, because I actually feel them as our natural abilities. Because as we continue our practice, part of the goal is to come into remembrance that we are the divine, that we are of the whole of divine consciousness, and that we have access to the knowledge of the multiverse. It's just a matter of remembering how to access that. So what we tend to do, because that's what we do in this particular part of consciousness, this piece of us that separates off to create this particular set of dimensions and have this experience, is we forget that we have all that stuff inside of us. And then we start looking outside of us, and we start, taking classes and reading books. And then we try different, what I call flavors of ice cream. And the thing is, I call them flavors of ice cream because they are all ice cream. And if you see over my shoulder, a friend of mine made a doodle of a ice cream cone, because I always talk about how we have so many beautiful, I call them toys, beautiful expressions of the divine remembrance that we are becoming, or allowing ourselves to remember. And where it's manifesting in what I call these amazing toys and individual, like I don't want it to make it sound flippant, right? But it's all these individual flavors, right? Colors, and whether it's sound healing and you have this kind of bowl or that kind of chime, or toning, or you have this, or you can use, like so many people are doing like divination cards or this kind of practice. I mean, I started a practice myself. I started Trinity Energy Progression to help leapfrog us through this. Michelle says, love how you refer to it as flavors of ice cream. Yeah. And I'll tell you why, because ice cream is like my favorite dessert. So I'm like, okay, when we like two different flavors of ice cream, right? So like if I like mint chocolate chip and you like butter pecan, does that make me right and you wrong? No, it just makes us different. It makes us just like find the flavors that really jive with us for whatever the filters of our experiences, right? So that's why I think ice cream is a great analogy, because there are all these beautiful individual, like rainbow opalescent expressions that are coming, and they're getting even more and more magical and amazing as we go, of our divinity, of our remembrance. And so what part of what is in this journey right now is coming to this place of being that expression, right? So on the journey to being that, what I call it is our sort of our divine note. Like, and if we look at the entire multiverse in a term of frequency, and I talked about this a lot this past weekend because I was in Dallas, Texas, and I went to help to co-host a alchemy bowl workshop with a couple that plays the bowls and travels, and they come here too, and also to sort of play in that for the weekend, because there is a step of that that's really incredible, which is we can get beyond words when we realize that we're just all frequency, right? And really our expressions are just frequency. And depending on who's talking, they talk about how There are belief systems that say the universe was created in a sound. And you've got Om, and you've got in the Bible, you've got, the sound, let there be light or whatever. I mean, then you have all these kind of different versions of that. And the whole idea is really when sound, we create the idea of sound through the way that our physical ears can perceive frequency. And our eyes too, because our eyes perceive color, which is frequency as well. So we have gotten very sort of microscopic on how to describe things, right? So we sort of I don't want to say mistakenly, but because of the filter of our individual journeys, and because of the filter of where we are in remembrance or forgetting, right, or how much we've forgotten, while this piece of our consciousness is embodied here, then we start to really like we take away the pure essence of the whole thing. So sound is just frequency. Really, it's not frequency is sound. Sound is just frequency. And the only reason we call it sound is because it's something that we attribute to our physical ears that we can hear, right? So what about the frequencies that we cannot hear with our ears, like the frequencies that animals can hear with their ears, right? That plants can sense, and we can sense all these frequencies. We live amongst them. It's just a matter of how we are conscious about them, right? So we attribute anything with frequency to sound, when actually frequency is basically the makeup of the energy of this multiverse, right? Which you want to call it frequency, you call it energy, it's up to you. So how that expresses itself is in all of these bajillions of facets, right? So if we want to just look at it in really basic terms, like we don't even have to give it any words, we can just call them different frequencies. And none of them are right, none of them wrong. Like, do you ever call like a note wrong? Like if you hear something playing, like, okay, yeah, we'll say it's wrong because of the score it's supposed to be playing or whatever. But if you hear an A or a C, do you think the A is right and the C is wrong, or the C is right and the A is wrong? Yeah, they're just part of the whole symphony, right? So when we talk about the expression of ourselves and our fullness, and the beautiful part about sound healing is that it takes us beyond the words to the remembrance of how free, and we talk, so this is what happens. We start talking about frequency, how we're all frequency and all kind of stuff. And then we start to push it away from us. And we start to minimize our abilities as a physical presence because we're like, oh, well, the sound has much more consciousness than we do. And I would tend to disagree with that, because it's like, well, no, the sound, right, is really a manifestation here of the frequencies that we are out there. And what I think is beautiful about sound healing is we present ourselves with these frequencies that we have forgotten we are. And those particular frequencies help us, whatever, come into alignment, express a certain kind of energy or whatever. And so it helps us to remember those so that we can align ourselves. And our physical bodies enjoy it because it is a physical sensation, right, as a sound. So that's a really long explanation for a short example. But so what happens though is we forget and we start saying it's the sound that healed me, right? Or it's the sound that heals me, and it's actually it's the frequency coming through in a way that I can perceive it in my conscious state, so that I can so I can remember how to match that vibration or match that frequency or express that frequency, not just match it, but just express it, because I already am it, right? So when we look at things from this holistic point of view in the multiverse, it is that we are all of it, right? And so when we look at things in wholeness, we say, well, it's all a part of me, and it's what I am in this particular embodiment. What am I expressing, right? So I call it the symphony of the multiverse, and some people call it the music of the spheres. And I'm saying, well, if you want to look at it as ice cream, look at it as ice cream. If you want to look at it as a symphony, look at it as the fact that each one of us is the perfect note to realize that you realize and remember the whole of the symphony, right? So I had to go through this, because now I'm going to talk about the tools specifically that we're using. And when we do that, like, so now we create, right? And people say channel. They say channel, or they say, yeah, channeled in, or was given this, like this, whatever, or was, I can't, there's other words like that. But so people bring it, so people right now more than ever are bringing in new kinds of practices, new kinds of ways to embody these kind of frequencies and alignment as our whole note and all that kind of stuff. And that's what we call heal. That's what healing really is. It's remembering the alignment of our wholeness and taking away all the stuff that we're holding in separation that causes us to manifest things like sickness, injury, anxiety, and all that kind of stuff. And so it seems really high level, but it's actually really basic. We make it really complex in our minds. And that's why it's important to talk about this, because what happens is this: we are in this, our basis for experience in these bodies has been generally, not the entire experience, but generally what we've come to is that the basis is that we start in a place of lack, right? So we experience through lack, we learn through lack, we learn like, and you might say no, but the thing is, look at anything that we do to try to attain something has an implication that we don't already have it, right? So I have to use this to get to this frequency is saying essentially, because I don't know how to do it myself, right? And it might be, and it might not be that you don't remember. It might be that you don't remember how to do it yourself right at this moment yet. But really, the answer is I'm going to play with this, or this resonates with me because it helps me to remember how to access that within myself. So for example, in the sound healing, the bowls, they aren't healing you. They're helping you remember. It's a reflection of us back to ourselves to remember what we are. Okay. And what happens because of the habits that we have so deeply embedded in this particular presentation of existence is that we don't take it further. We often don't take it further because then we think that magic pill is what just fixes everything, because we now are in, then we disempower ourselves. So we start to empower ourselves by like working on getting to a place where, okay, well, this works for me really well. And then we stop because then we think that's enough, instead of this was a stepping stone for me to go even further, right? So even when I teach Trinity Energy Progression, because really that's what the whole purpose of the practice is, right? It's about talking about that, but it's like getting to a place of not just talking about practicing that. I tell people you will stop using this particular practice when you get to the place where you don't need it anymore. Like if you are on the journey to remember that wholeness of divine consciousness that we are, then you won't need any method of getting there. You won't need any ritual or ceremony or mudra or words. You won't need anything, because all that stuff is less than the whole. It's just a part of who we are. So like people use tarot cards, and they use, like you want to talk about Reiki or all other forms of energy healing. There's so many different kinds now, right? I mean, Trinity Energy Progression is considered one as well as it's not just an energy healing practice. It's actually an entire practice in itself, a way of life kind of thing, because it's a way of existing with that focus and commitment of back to being whole, and then letting go of it so that you just are, right? That was my little plug for the day. But I mean, you have all kinds of different practices. And then it's like, oh, well, this is, access to the divine consciousness. But no, we are the divine consciousness. So we don't need access. It's just remembering how to access it. That's the key. And then once we remember how to access it, we don't need to use the intermediaries anymore. We become, so what I tell people all the time, and this is a misunderstanding all the time, like people think, oh, I'm against using tools at all, right? Like, look at how many beautiful divination decks are out there right now, and so many different like crystals and whatever, and all kinds of healing practices. And you have, color healing and ray healing and this frequency healing and that frequency healing, and they're all beautiful. They're all flavors of ice cream. That's what I mean when I talk about flavors of ice cream is, so it's beautiful to see them expressed as they are being expressed, because it is taking us beyond where we've been. And then we can say, oh, look at these. They're all beautiful flavors of ice cream. But they're all ice cream, which means they're all beautiful and wonderful and great. And so what I feel like the reason is that we have in coming to creating all of these and manifesting them here is just for stepping stones for us to remember that it's all us inside and we're the ones that actually create it, right? So it's challenging because we put so much power outside of us. Like we always talk about, well, I channel an ascended master, or I channel this archangel, or I channel these star beings, and we put this importance on, oh, well, there's always something greater than me. And so we push that on each other as well, because we believe that of ourselves. So then we push that on each other saying, oh, well, where did you get that information from? And it's often discounted if it is presented as being anything less than like, oh, well, Saint Germain, or, Archangel Michael, or, whatever. And it's not, there's just so many different practices in that. And so what really is to come to play is, so the key is, if we are going to take back our power, our true divine power and wholeness. And when people say oneness, but wholeness is all encompassing, right? As oneness is too, but I think it's funny, our minds sort of see it differently. And when we do that, we realize, when I say wholeness, it means you and I are the same. Me and Archangel Michael are the same. Me and Jesus, me and Buddha, me and Krishna, me and the Pleiadians, me and the Blu-rays, me and whatever, all the same. So there's no one word or message that is more or less important than the other. The messages are there to help us remember what's inside of us, right? And sometimes they're presented not in ways that we think are productive. I was talking today with someone, and we were talking about somebody who's very difficult in our lives that we had in common. And I said, well, in all reality, this person has been a great teacher, because they help us to interact with others who are very similar, difficult dispositions, who have very low self-esteem, who then try to over project it onto others and be super critical and all that kind of stuff. And actually, that's a great skill, to be able to just be totally neutral and understand it's not you personally and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, what a great teacher that individual is, and yet they don't even know it, because look at what they present here. It's not like they're a teacher, right? And these are these things that we define. So we put these hierarchies through the ego, right? And we say, well, this information is more or less or whatever. And oh, if this person, created this divination deck, they must know better than I do. Or if this person looked at my astrology chart and told me this is what it is, then it must be so, because they know better than I do. Or if, like, I've had people come to me because what I push people to do, what I am guided to do, my crusade, my commitment and dedication, is pushing us all to remember that we have all the answers and knowledge already within us, and we need not look outside of them. Ultimately, is for us to get past all of these beautiful flavors of ice cream, to acknowledge them for the prisms that they are, and not get lost in them and stop there, because ultimately the key is to get past that, to be in the state of being as the divine consciousness that we are, in wholeness. So it sounds really easy, but that's where we get stuck. It's like we get stuck in the swamp of shinies, and we forget, like, okay, these are great tools. They're all great tools, because but ultimately we have to look at what they're there for and what they're doing for us, right? So everything around us is a message. So the tree outside my window is just as much of a message as any book I read. any class I go to. And it's interesting because, like, this past week, in having a conversation with other people who are of this practice, the practice I teach, and we talk all the time about it's all within us, it's all what we express, and then they fall into, oh, well, I don't know. Well, this person said that this has changed, and I need to go and ask him, like, what about this in relation? And I'm like, well, why don't you just ask your own guidance? Because if you're practicing self-sufficiency, independence, and wholeness and consciousness, the goal is to be completely independent, meaning I can go and ask my guidance and get the answer and trust it, and not have to go and ask somebody else, because what that is implying is that I believe somebody else has more of an answer than I do. Now, like I said, all along the way, it's great to have so many of us expressing in so many individual beautiful ways, so that we have messages that resonate on our frequency continuously, so that it helps us to remember every step of the way, right? The key is for us to allow ourselves to let go of those messages, those remembrances, those tools. The key is for us to remember that there will be a time we'll be ready to let go of them, because we'll be beyond them, the need to have them in our reality. And so what happens is we go the opposite. People say, oh, well, this worked for me, this got me here, all this kind of stuff. And then they tighten up the hatches, they lock down, and they say, I'm not going to go beyond that because this helped me get here. Okay, but it helped you get here. And now is for you to go beyond that. It's continue to grow and evolve. And we forget that step. The important step that's the most important step, is saying, okay, I don't need the tools anymore. And I always talk about, so when people say, oh, well, I know you hate tools. I'm like, no, I don't, because they're really cool things, all of them. It's when we limit ourselves by saying the only way I can access divine consciousness, access this level of frequent, you can use all these different terms. The only way I can access higher consciousness is through this ritual, is through this tool, is through using this particular thing. And it's like, oh, and I hear all of these interesting conversations about, oh, but this is better than this. And I've said it I will say I've said it too. It's like, oh, well, but what I'm really I really put an effort on carefully wording everything I say to say, well, this works better for me than that, or this resonates with me better than that. And it doesn't mean that anybody else is wrong. It means that this is what works for me right now. It doesn't mean it's going to work for you. And the thing is, you have the answer of what's going to resonate. So these are these little tiny tweaks and nuances that seem minor, but they're really major, because then we get stuck in this, like, we go beyond a certain place, right? And then it's like, okay, well, and then there's like, oh, well, we have the ability to heal anything, heal anything, change anything within ourselves, anything, no matter what other people say. We create it, we can change it. So, but what happens is, when we continue to give our power to something, we say, oh, well, this is helping to make me better. Well, no, the reality is, this is what's helping me to remember how to change and realign this, so that I don't have it in my reality anymore. I'm the healer for myself. You're the healer for yourself. Nobody and nothing heals you but you. And all the stuff around you helps you to remember how to align with that, how to align with those frequencies that allow you to not hold on to those things, sickness, illness, victimhood, all kinds of different, anxiety, and even like depression, and anything that we, put this whole victimhood thing around. It's getting to the place to realize I'm the one that can change it. And I can change and complete the lessons that I set out to learn with it. And I can change the need to have it in my reality. And I can change it 100% without needing for it to come back. We have a hard time believing that, because underneath it all, we come from that start point, being born into this reality, this part of our consciousness, again, like I was saying, into lack. that I don't have this, that I have to get it from someplace else, that I have to get well-being from someplace else, that I have to depend on somebody else to make me well, right? And if we remembered one thing, is that we're the ones who create, and so therefore we are the ones who change. And whatever tools we use, and includes pharmaceuticals, Western medicine, it includes going to the doctor, it includes all kind of stuff. When we have this commitment to self-awareness and remembrance, then we are in complete tune with our well-being. And yes, sometimes we're guided to go to the doctor. Sometimes we're guided to go get tests on something. Then the key is not to fall into this panic because then of whatever other people's judgments are about whatever it is, but to say, okay, so now I'm going to go inside and say, all right, because I couldn't remember that on my own. What is it for me to change so that I can realign myself in a way that I don't have this in my reality so that I'm comfortable and can move forward? We can do it. And I know there's going to be somebody who watches this that's going to be going, yeah, okay, except for my situation, because I have this chronic whatever, and you can't change that or whatever. It's all what you believe. I've had people come to me and say, and these are the best people to work with, the ones that come to me and say, I have been told by X amount of doctors that this won't change, that I can't change this, and I don't believe them. So can you help me do that? And I say, of course I can, because you've now licked 75% of the issue, which is the belief that you can't. And I have watched people change miraculously their realities in working with this stuff because I help them to get beyond the belief, help them to remember, get beyond the belief that they don't have the power to change it. And that they have to believe what the doctors say, or they have to believe what other people in their lives say, or they have to believe what the message says, or the channeler, or whatever. It's like, okay, you can choose to believe that. And, I say that about, so when we talk about full moons and we talk about, Mercury retrogrades and we talk about all that kind of stuff. And I mean, and I it sounded a little judgy, but I get a little exasperated, because it's just like we're moving our focus of giving away our power in this like what we would call non-spiritual way to now we're giving away our empowerment in a very spiritual way. But we're still giving away our empowerment, right? And we don't realize it. So it's like, okay, well, what I think is beautiful, and I'm going to go back to that, and I'm not really doing this to plug Trinity energy progression. I'm doing this to actually talk about a perception, so just an observation that I've been making. What I find beautiful about it, because I started the practice now almost 8 years ago, and in January it'll be 8 years, and I still and today realizing what it truly helps people do. It helps them to free themselves up to be the full expression of the note they are in this multiverse of symphony, right? And so, and that sounds really simple, but it's really deep, because it pulls out all these things these partitions and sense of lack, to come to that place of remembrance and start being from the place of remembrance, so that we can allow ourselves that we have the power to be that expression, that flavor of ice cream that we came here to be. And that is our true purpose. And to me, that's the beautiful thing. And that's the thing, is always to ask, well, is what I'm doing going to allow me to express me in the most unique possible way? The most unique way that I came here to be, or else I wouldn't have been embodied here as me. And if you get no, then it's like, okay, has it helped me in every way it's going to be able to? And now now show me like how to get past that. And that is, I say, show me, I'm talking to your higher self, right? You're talking to your higher self. Again, it's the practice it's fostering the practice of that inner dependence. And we talk it till we turn blue in the face. Oh, yes, absolutely. And this is absolutely, it's all within, but you got to get there by going through this practice, or you got to get there by using this. And then I sort of laugh. So anyway, I want you to, Michelle says, wow, that's a beautiful way to explain Trinity. I wholeheartedly agree. Great talk today as always. Thanks. Well, thank you. Thanks for joining. So anyway, but the thing is, so let's embrace and embody and love ourselves as the expression that we are, but also be aware that it's gonna also change and evolve as we change and evolve, and it's gonna get more powerful and bigger and more expressive and even more of a unique way the more we go. And the way to do that is to let go of the things that we like that hold us into a pattern of staying in a place that we're in, because you know what, we give it honor. We give this whole thing honor of like, oh, I got this practice helped me get here. And so you get here, and then it's like, well, now I've got to stay here because I've got to honor this practice. It's like, well, no, well, by honoring the practice is going beyond that to say, I used this, it was great, and that worked for me, and now I don't need it anymore because I can move into this, and I don't even need those extra tools or rituals or whatever outside of me. So look in your life at those things this week. That's what I want you to do. That's your home play, is look at what it is in your life that you might just haven't changed. And the thing is, as we evolve, the practices that we use evolve as well. And so even if you use the same practice, it's probably going to be different than it was like a couple of years ago, a couple of months ago, or whatever. And if it's not, that's something to look at and saying, why am I limiting myself? Because if it's the same, then there's something I'm holding back on, because it does change as we evolve. And if we're stuck in one place, then the thing is, okay, well, then what is it for me to get over this and get past that? So start looking at that within your own journey and say, okay, because, there are things that we say, oh no, my precious. Many of us have built careers on different specific expressions of our flavors of ice cream. And then our ice cream changes and it's like, oh my gosh. So anyway, things to look at this week. Thanks for joining me. We'll see you next time. Have a good one. This is Angela Coulter with this week's Living the Shift.